dog's unyielding loyalty at its owner's grave puzzles onlookers. But when authorities are called to investigate, they find an unsettling secret buried beneath that hints at a tragic mystery. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning fog hung low over Maplewood Cemetery as residents gathered around plot 247. The golden retriever's fur was damp from the morning dew, his body pressed against the cold granite of John Miller's headstone. Buddy hadn't moved from this spot for 3 days, refusing food from well-meaning visitors who tried to coax him away. His loyalty to the deceased teacher had become the talk of the small town. Several townspeople stood in small clusters, their voices hushed as they watched the dog. Mary Thompson, who ran the local diner, wiped tears from her eyes as she set down a bowl of water near Buddy. The dog acknowledged her presence with a brief glance, before returning his gaze to the headstone. The inscription read, "John Miller, 1975 to 2024, beloved teacher and mentor." From her position near an old oak tree, Sarah Johnson observed the scene with professional detachment. As a private investigator with 15 years of experience, she'd learned to look past surface emotions to spot inconsistencies. Something about this display of canine devotion and community grief didn't sit right with her. She noticed how some residents avoided looking directly at the grave, while others seemed to linger too long, as if searching for something. Their behavior suggested an undercurrent of tension beneath the public display of mourning. Sarah pulled out her notebook, jotting down names and reactions of those present. The crowd began to thin as people headed to work, but Buddy remained unmoved. Sarah approached the grave, crouching down to get a better look at the dog. Buddy's collar was worn but clean, suggesting someone had been caring for him recently. The tag bore John Miller's address and phone number, now irrelevant since the teacher's death 2 weeks ago. As Sarah studied the gravesite, she noted fresh flowers from multiple visitors, cards from students, and small mementos that seemed out of place at a teacher's grave, including what appeared to be a partially burned photograph tucked behind a bouquet. Before she could examine it more closely, her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Johnson," she answered, stepping away from the grave. "Sarah, it's Dave from the department." The voice of her former colleague was tense. "Got a minute? What's on your mind?" Sarah moved further from the gathering, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. "Remember that case we worked 3 years ago? The one with the missing teenagers?" Sarah's hand tightened on her phone. The Preston County disappearances. 3 kids vanished within 6 months. We never found them. Well, I've been doing some digging. Those kids, all of them had connections to Maplewood High School, more specifically, to John Miller's mentorship program. Sarah turned back toward the grave, where Buddy still maintained his vigil. "Go on, there's more. I've found records of at least 4 other students who disappeared over the past decade. All of them were part of Miller's special mentorship initiative. The program was private, invitation only, no official school records. Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah watched as Margaret Miller, the teacher's widow, approached the grave with fresh flowers. "Because I think we missed something big back then. And now that Miller's dead," Dave's voice trailed off. "The truth might finally come out," Sarah finished. "Exactly. Listen, I can't officially reopen the case without new evidence. But if someone were to look into Miller's background, his relationships with these students..." Sarah understood the implication. As a private investigator, she could probe where the police couldn't, without probable cause. "Send me everything you have on the disappearances. And Dave, keep this between us for now." Ending the call, Sarah looked back at the scene before her. Margaret Miller knelt by the grave, her hand resting on Buddy's head. The dog allowed the touch but didn't move from his position. To anyone else, it was a touching scene of shared grief, but Sarah now saw it through a different lens. The beloved teacher, the loyal dog, the grieving widow, the supportive community. It all seemed too perfect, like a carefully constructed image. And in Sarah's experience, perfect surfaces often concealed the darkest secrets. She opened her notebook again, this time writing with purpose. John Miller, Mentor Program. Missing students, unofficial records. Connection to Preston County cases. Why did Buddy choose to guard the grave? What does Margaret Miller know? The investigation was officially beginning, and Sarah had a feeling it would unravel more than just the mystery of John Miller's mentorship program. It would shake the foundations of Maplewood itself. Sarah parked her car in front of the Miller residence, a well-maintained Victorian house with dark green shutters. Margaret Miller had agreed to meet after several phone calls, though her reluctance was evident in her clipped responses. The house, like everything else connected to John Miller, presented an immaculate facade. Margaret opened the door before Sarah could ring the bell. She was tall, in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her clothes were expensive but subdued, a grey cashmere sweater and black slacks that spoke of quiet wealth. "Come in, Ms. Johnson," Margaret said, leading Sarah into a study filled with academic awards and family photos. "I've set aside an hour for this conversation. I hope that will be sufficient." Sarah took the offered seat, noting how the room seemed frozen in time. John Miller's reading glasses still lay on his desk, next to a stack of graded papers. "Thank you for meeting with me. I'd like to discuss your husband's mentorship program." Margaret's posture stiffened slightly. John dedicated his life to helping troubled students. The program was his pride and joy. "Can you tell me how it worked?" Sarah pulled out her notebook, watching Margaret's reactions carefully. John would identify students who needed extra guidance, usually those from difficult backgrounds or struggling academically. He'd work with them one-on-one, sometimes in groups. Many went on to college, thanks to his help. Margaret's voice carried practiced pride, but her fingers twisted her wedding ring unconsciously. Was there official oversight? The school board trusted John implicitly. He had complete autonomy in selecting and mentoring students. Margaret rose, walking to a shelf lined with photographs. "These are some of his success stories." Sarah approached the shelf, studying the faces of young people posed with John Miller. Each photo showed him with an arm around a student's shoulder, both smiling at the camera. But something caught her attention: subtle differences in the students' expressions. Some smiled naturally, others seemed tense. "Did you ever participate in the mentoring sessions?" "No." Margaret's response was quick, almost sharp. That was John's domain. "I supported his work," but she trailed off, turning away. Sarah pressed gently. "But there were late nights, phone calls at odd hours, students showing up at our door needing help. John never turned them away." Margaret's voice carried a hint of old resentment. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Margaret excused herself, returning moments later with a young man Sarah recognized from her research. Jake Stevens, now in his mid-20s, one of John's former mentees. "I didn't know you had company," Jake said, shifting uncomfortably. His eyes darted between Sarah and Margaret. "Jake works as our handyman now," Margaret explained. "John always believed in providing opportunities." Sarah seized the chance. "Mr. Stevens, I'd love to hear about your experience in the mentorship program." Jake's face paled slightly. "I really should get to work on the garage door." "Just a few questions," Sarah insisted. "You were in the program from 2016 to 2018, correct?" "Yeah. Mr. Miller helped me graduate. Got me straightened out." Jake's words were right, but his body language screamed discomfort. He kept glancing at Margaret, as if seeking approval. "And after the program, I went to community college for a while." Jake rubbed his neck nervously, didn't finish. "But Mr. Miller kept in touch, got me this job." "Did you know Tom Reynolds?" "He was in the program around the same time." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Margaret's hand tightened on her sweater. Jake's face went completely white. "I should get to work," Jake mumbled, practically fleeing the room. Sarah noted their reactions, adding to her growing list of inconsistencies. Back in her car, she called Dave, I need everything you can find on Jake Stevens and his connection to Tom Reynolds, she said. And Dave, run background checks on all students who went through Miller's program, focusing on the years 2016 to 2018. The information came through that evening. 5 students from that period had disappeared without a trace. 3 more had died under suspicious circumstances. All had been part of Miller's mentorship program. Sarah spread the files across her desk, creating a timeline. The pattern was undeniable. Every few months, a student would vanish. Official investigations found nothing. Parents received letters or emails saying their children had transferred schools or moved away. The cases were closed before they truly began. But one detail stood out. Jake Stevens was the last student to see Tom Reynolds before his disappearance. And now Jake was working for Margaret Miller, staying close to the family that might hold the key to the entire mystery. Sarah pinned photos of the missing students to her wall, connecting them with red string to John Miller's picture in the center. The beloved teacher's smiling face looked back at her, his eyes holding secrets that were finally beginning to surface. She picked up her phone one more time. Dave, I need one more thing. Get me the security footage from Maplewood High School, dates when each student was last seen, and find out everything you can about John Miller's activities during those periods. The pattern was emerging, but Sarah knew she was only scratching the surface. Somewhere beneath the facade of mentorship and community service lay a darker truth, one that had cost several young people their futures, and possibly their lives. The cemetery looked different at night. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the headstones. 2 members of her investigative team, Mike Chen and Rachel Torres, spread out behind her, their own lights sweeping the grounds. Buddy remained at his post by John Miller's grave, his eyes reflecting the artificial light. Areas secure, Mike reported through their earpieces. No other visitors. Sarah approached the grave, noting how Buddy's behavior changed. The dog's ears perked up, and he shifted slightly, revealing a patch of disturbed earth near the headstone's base. Rachel, bring the ground-penetrating radar. Rachel wheeled the equipment over, setting up the scanner. What are we looking for? Anything that shouldn't be here. Sarah watched the monitor as Rachel began the scan. The first pass showed nothing unusual, but on the second sweep, something appeared just 18 inches below the surface. There, Sarah pointed. Mike, bring the shovels. They worked carefully, removing soil until Mike's shovel struck something solid. Sarah brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing a leather-bound book wrapped in plastic. Buddy whined softly as she lifted it out. Under the portable work lights they'd set up, Sarah examined their find. The book was John Miller's personal diary, its pages filled with neat handwriting. She pulled on latex gloves before opening it, aware that this could be crucial evidence. September 15th, 2018, she read aloud. Tom came to me today. He's in trouble again, deeper than before. I tried to help, but I'm losing control of the situation. The others don't understand what we're dealing with. Rachel photographed each page as Sarah turned them, documenting everything. The entries painted a picture of a man struggling with increasing anxiety over his students' activities. October 3rd, 2018. Tom's getting worse. The incident at the warehouse wasn't an accident. He's dragging other students into his schemes. I should report it, but that would destroy everything we've built. There has to be another way. Sarah paused at an entry that seemed particularly agitated, the handwriting less controlled. October 15th, he knows. Tom knows about Preston County. He's threatening to expose everything unless I help him cover up what happened at the warehouse. I can't let him destroy these kids' lives, but I can't keep protecting him either. The program was supposed to save them, not enable this. Mike, who had been keeping watch, suddenly spoke up. Movement at the gate. Security guard doing rounds. Pack it up, Sarah ordered, but continued reading as Rachel quickly dismantled their equipment. The final entries were increasingly disturbing. November 1st. Made arrangements. Tom won't be a problem anymore. But the cost. God help me, the cost. November 3rd. It's done. The others understand now. They know what happens when you break the rules. The program will continue. It has to. Too many lives depend on it. The final entry was dated just 3 days before John Miller's death. They're getting closer. Sarah Johnson is asking questions about Preston County again. I should have known it wouldn't stay buried forever. But he knows where everything is. He's the only one I could trust in the end. If anything happens to me, he'll guard the truth. Margaret will understand when it's over. Sarah closed the diary as Mike helped pack up their gear. Rachel, I want these pages analyzed for any hidden marks or codes. Mike, run background checks on any names mentioned in the entries. Focus on the warehouse incident and anything connected to Preston County. Back in her car, Sarah reviewed her notes. The diary revealed John Miller as a man torn between protecting his students and controlling a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. But the entries raised more questions than they answered. What happened in Preston County? What was Tom trying to cover up at the warehouse? And why did John Miller trust his dog more than his own wife with whatever secret he took to his grave? Sarah pulled out her phone, dialing Dave's number. I need everything you have on warehouse incidents in the fall of 2018. And Dave, we need to look deeper into Preston County. Miller mentioned it specifically in connection with Tom Reynolds. You think there's a connection between the disappearances? I think John Miller was running more than just a mentorship program. The diary suggests he was protecting his students from something or someone. And whatever it was, it got Tom Reynolds in deep enough that Miller had to take drastic action. Sarah looked back at the cemetery. Buddy had returned to his vigilant position by the grave, as if nothing had been disturbed. But now she understood. The dog wasn't just mourning. He was guarding something far more important than a memory. One more thing, she told Dave. Get me satellite imagery of Preston County for the past 5 years. Whatever happened there, it's the key to everything. The diary felt heavy in her bag, its secrets only partially revealed. Sarah had a feeling the next phase of the investigation would lead her down an even darker path, one that would test her understanding of justice, loyalty, and the true meaning of protection. Sarah spread newspaper clippings across her office desk, each headline telling a piece of Tom Reynolds' story. Local teen linked to string of burglaries. Warehouse fire raises questions. Honor students, dramatic fall. The articles painted a picture of a promising student's descent into crime, but something about the narrative felt manufactured. Her computer pinged with an email from Dave. Police records showed Tom had been arrested 3 times between 2017 and 2018, but charges were mysteriously dropped each time. The arresting officer was the same in all 3 cases. Detective James Morrison, now retired. Sarah dialed Morrison's number, obtained through department contacts. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Detective Morrison, Sarah Johnson. I'm investigating John Miller's mentorship program. A long pause followed. Miller's dead. Let it rest. Like you let those cases against Tom Reynolds rest. Another pause. Meet me at Carson's diner. 1 hour. The diner was nearly empty when Sarah arrived. Morrison sat in a corner booth, aged but still imposing in his civilian clothes. A cup of black coffee sat untouched before him. Miller came to me about Tom, Morrison said without preamble. Kid had potential, he said. Just needed guidance. Asked me to give him chances, and you agreed. Miller had pull in this town. He'd helped my own son years back. But Tom, Morrison shook his head. Tom was different. Smart, but twisted. Used that intelligence wrong. Sarah leaned forward. What happened at the warehouse? Morrison's face darkened. Official report says electrical fire. Truth, Tom was running a scheme, using other students to move stolen goods. Miller found out, tried to stop it. Then things got complicated. How? Before Morrison could answer, the diner's door chimed. 3 town council members entered, including Bill Hartford, head of the school board. Their conversation died when they spotted Sarah. Hartford approached their table. Detective Morrison, Ms. Johnson, discussing our dear departed friend. The false warmth in his voice set Sarah's teeth on edge. Morrison stood abruptly, just sharing old war stories. I should go. Hartford took Morrison's vacant seat. Miss Johnson, the council is concerned about your investigation. John Miller was a pillar of this community. Is that why the council approved his mentorship program without oversight? Hartford's smile tightened. John helped troubled kids when no one else would, including Tom Reynolds and the other missing students. Troubled teens leave town all the time. Nothing suspicious about wanting a fresh start. Hartford's tone suggested the conversation was over. Later that afternoon, Sarah attended the hastily called community meeting at the high school gymnasium. The crowd was larger than expected, clearly divided into 2 camps. One group wore blue ribbons, John Miller's favorite color, while others sat separately, their faces tense with unspoken accusations. Principal Karen Chen took the podium. We're here to discuss recent allegations about John Miller's legacy. There's nothing to discuss, shouted a blue ribbon wearer. John saved my daughter. What about my son? A woman stood up, trembling. He disappeared after joining that program. No goodbye, no explanation. The room erupted in angry shouts. Sarah watched from the back, noting faces and reactions. Hartford tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The carefully maintained image of community unity was cracking. A sudden commotion near the doors drew everyone's attention. Buddy had somehow gotten into the gymnasium. The dog stood still, hackles raised, staring intently at Hartford before letting out a series of sharp barks. The crowd fell silent. Buddy turned and ran toward the exit, stopping to look back at Sarah before disappearing into the evening darkness. Sarah's phone vibrated. A text from Rachel found something in the diary analysis. Hidden message in the page margins. Coordinates. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Sarah slipped out, following Buddy's path. The dog's behavior wasn't random. Like everything else in this case, it was a signal pointing toward something the town's leadership wanted to keep hidden. She called Dave while walking to her car. Run those coordinates Rachel found, and get me everything you can on Bill Hartford's connection to the warehouse property. What am I looking for? Anything that explains why a school board president would care about a burned warehouse. And Dave, check if any of the missing students' families tried to file complaints with the council. The pieces were starting to align, but Sarah sensed she was still missing the bigger picture. John Miller had created something more than a mentorship program. Tom Reynolds had discovered its true purpose, and somewhere in Maplewood, hidden behind respectable facades and blue ribbons, lay answers worth killing to protect. Buddy's trail led deep into Maplewood Forest, where decades-old pines blocked out the evening light. Sarah followed the dog's tracks in the soft earth, her flashlight beam catching glimpses of an overgrown path. Rachel and Mike flanked her, equipment ready. Coordinates matched this area, Rachel confirmed, checking her GPS. Quarter-mile ahead, the cabin appeared suddenly, a weathered structure nearly swallowed by vegetation. Its windows were boarded, but recent footprints marked the front porch. Buddy's tracks led directly to the door. Mike, perimeter check, Sarah ordered. Rachel, thermal scan. Rachel raised her infrared camera. No heat signatures inside. Building's cold. The door's lock had been recently oiled. Someone maintained this place. Sarah picked it carefully, trying to preserve any evidence. Inside, dust covered everything except a clear path to the back room. Sarah, Mike called from outside. Found something. Underground cellar entrance, hidden under brush. The cellar doors were heavy, built to last. Inside, concrete steps led to a surprising sight. A clean, organized storage space with metal shelving units and a modern dehumidifier quietly running. This is no hunting cabin, Rachel observed, photographing everything. This was designed for long-term storage. Sarah moved methodically through the shelves. Boxes labeled by year contained student files, more extensive than school records should be. She opened one marked 2018 and found detailed notes on student vulnerabilities, family problems, pressure points that could be exploited. "Over here," Mike called. A locked cabinet yielded to his picks, revealing rows of personal belongings. Sarah pulled out a silver charm bracelet, its inscription reading, "Happy 16th, Emily." Emily Chen, one of the missing students. Rachel discovered a notebook wedged behind the cabinet. "Travelogues," she said, scanning the pages. Dates, times, destinations, all corresponding with student disappearances. Sarah's flashlight caught something metallic under a tarp. She pulled it back, revealing a wall of photographs. Students at various locations, bus stations, airports, new cities, proof of life pictures. But something was off about their expressions. They weren't running away, Sarah realized. This was a relocation operation. Her phone buzzed Dave's number. Before she could answer, footsteps creaked overhead. "Kill the lights," Sarah whispered. They froze in darkness as heavy boots moved across the cabin floor. The cellar doors opened. A beam of light swept down the stairs. "Ms. Johnson," a man's voice called. "I believe it's time we talked." Sarah recognized the voice, but couldn't place it. She motioned her team toward the emergency exit they'd identified earlier. "Your investigation is causing problems," the voice continued, descending. "Mr. Miller had a system. It worked. Some things are better left alone." They slipped through the exit as the footsteps reached the cellar floor. Outside, Buddy waited, eerily silent. Sarah led her team through the woods, using darkness for cover. Back at her car, Sarah finally checked Dave's message. Urgent Hartford linked to offshore accounts. Regular payments coincide with student disappearances. Miller was signatory. Another text followed. Found Emily Chen, living in Seattle under new identity. Says she requested extraction from abusive home. Claims Miller saved her life. Sarah's mind raced. The cabin wasn't just storage. It was a way station. Miller hadn't been abducting students. He'd been helping them disappear. But why the elaborate scheme? And how did Tom Reynolds threaten it all? Her phone rang again. Unknown number. "You found the cabin," a woman's voice said. "Now you understand why it can't go public. Those kids needed to vanish. Margaret, meet me at the school. Midnight. I'll tell you everything about Tom." The line went dead. Sarah turned to her team. "Rachel, secure the evidence. Mike, run protection detail on Margaret Miller. Something's happening tonight." She looked at Buddy, who sat watching her with intelligent eyes. The dog had led them here deliberately, following his late master's plan. But Sarah sensed they'd stumbled into something bigger than a teacher's secret rescue operation. Her phone buzzed one final time. A text from a blocked number. "You found the first cabin. Did you really think there was just one?" Sarah stared at the message. Tom Reynolds wasn't just another student in Miller's program. He was something else entirely. And midnight was approaching fast. Sarah stood before Captain Andrea Martinez's desk at the Maplewood Police Department, spreading photos from the cabin across its surface. The captain examined them with increasing discomfort. "You're telling me John Miller ran an underground railroad for troubled teens?" Martinez's skepticism was clear in her voice. "Not just troubled, endangered," Sarah corrected. "The files show patterns: domestic abuse, sexual exploitation, students who needed to disappear." Martinez picked up Emily Chen's file. "These are serious accusations against prominent families. That's why Miller kept it off books. Official channels were compromised." "By whom?" "Your department, for starters." Sarah placed Morrison's arrest reports on the desk. "Selective enforcement. Cases buried. Hartford's financial records show payments to officers." Martinez's face hardened. "Those are my people you're accusing. Check the offshore accounts." Hartford wasn't just paying to hide crimes. He was funding the relocations. Miller used his reputation to identify at-risk students, but Hartford provided the infrastructure. And you think I'll just launch an investigation based on stolen documents? I think you'll investigate because 3 hours ago, someone tried to burn down that cabin. Professional job. They're cleaning house. That got Martinez's attention. She reached for her phone, then stopped. If what you're saying is true, I don't know who I can trust in my own department. Start with Detective Lucy Chen, Emily's aunt. She's been feeding me information through Dave. Martinez studied Sarah for a long moment. What about the party? Miller's last night. Sarah pulled out her tablet, showing surveillance footage Rachel had recovered. May 15th, Miller hosted a graduation celebration for his mentorship group. 16 students attended. Video shows them all leaving at midnight. But traffic cameras tell a different story. 5 cars returned at 2 a.m. Tom Reynolds' vehicle was among them. Martinez leaned back. What happened at that party, Johnson? I think that's what someone's trying to hide. Margaret Miller agreed to talk, but she's missing. Mike lost her tail an hour ago. Missing how? Left her house through a basement exit we didn't know existed. Like she'd done it before. Sarah pulled up house blueprints. The Millers modified their home 5 years ago. Added escape routes, panic rooms. They were preparing for something. Martinez finally reached for her phone. Chen, my office. Now, to Sarah. What else aren't you telling me? The party wasn't just a celebration. Miller kept a guest list in his diary. Notes next to each name. Ready, unstable, liability, categories. I think he was evaluating them for extraction. Tom Reynolds was marked as compromised. Detective Chen entered, face grave. Captain, we've got movement at the old factory on River Street. Multiple vehicles. Martinez stood. That's private property, Hartford's holdings. According to property records, Sarah added, he bought it the day after Miller's party. Chen, get me thermal imaging of that factory. Johnson, you're staying here. Like hell I am. Margaret Miller's out there, and she knows what happened that night. This isn't a debate. You've done your job. Let us do ours. Sarah placed one final photo on the desk. The warehouse after the fire. Last time police handled this alone, evidence disappeared. I'm coming with you. Martinez studied the photo, then Chen. Your call, Lucy. It's your niece in those files. Chen nodded slowly. We do this right. Full team, proper warrants. But Sarah comes. She knows the players. Fine. Martinez grabbed her coat. But understand this. Anything we find goes through official channels. No more private investigation. Sarah's phone buzzed. Rachel had completed the diary analysis. The message made her blood run cold. Last page, UV light. Miller knew he was going to die. Party wasn't for graduation. It was selection for final extraction. TR wasn't just compromised. He was the compromise. Another text followed from Mike. Tracked Margaret. She's headed to the factory, but she's not alone. Sarah looked at Martinez. We need to move, now. Why? Because John Miller's last party wasn't about saving kids. It was about choosing who to save from something bigger. Tom Reynolds figured it out, tried to stop it. And now everyone connected to that night is either dead, missing, or hiding. Martinez checked her weapon. How many students are we talking about? That's the thing, Sarah said, showing them the final diary entry under UV light. According to this, they're not all students. Some are witnesses, some are victims, and some are hunters. Chun's phone rang. Thermal imaging results. Captain, we've got 20+ heat signatures in that factory. They're in the sub-basement. A sub-basement that doesn't exist in any building plans, Sarah added. Martinez grabbed her radio. All units. Silent approach to River Street factory. Chen, Johnson, with me. And Johnson. Whatever we find in there. No more secrets. Sarah thought of Buddy, still guarding that grave. The secrets aren't mine to keep, Captain. They never were. Sarah reviewed the security footage on her tablet, while the tactical team geared up around her. The video showed Tom Reynolds entering John Miller's office the day before the teacher's death. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. "Enhancements complete," Rachel said through her earpiece. "Audio's rough, but clear enough." Sarah pressed play. "They're coming, John." Tom's voice was strained. "Hartford's cleaning house. He knows about Seattle. How many compromised?" John's question was calm, practiced. "At least 3 safe houses. They found Emily's trail, and the others, underground for now. But the network's falling apart. Your reputation won't protect them anymore." A long pause. "You were supposed to be different, Tom. My best student. I was. That's how I figured it out. The mentorship program, the disappearances. You're not just saving them, you're recruiting." The audio crackled. When it cleared, John's tone had changed. "They needed to become ghosts, Tom, real ones. Not just new identities, new purposes. As what? Vigilantes. Underground soldiers. Protectors," John corrected. "For the next generation of runners." Sarah paused the playback as Martinez approached. "Miller wasn't just helping kids disappear," Sarah explained. "He was building a network of guardians, former victims becoming saviors. And Tom Reynolds figured out the end game. But something went wrong." Sarah pulled up Tom's student file. His grades, behavior, everything screams perfect candidate. So why did Miller mark him as compromised? Martinez checked her tactical vest. Chen's team found something. Loading dock security logs. Tom made regular deliveries there over 3 years. To the factory, no. From it to other safe houses. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Mike. "Margaret's inside. Confirmed visual. She's armed." The pieces clicked. Tom wasn't compromised, Sarah realized. He was embedded. Miller's deep cover operative inside Hartford's organization. "Explain." Sarah pulled up more files on her tablet. Tom's juvenile record. Too perfect. Every crime positioned him closer to Hartford's operation. Miller didn't mentor him, he handled him. A teenager as an undercover operative. Martinez sounded skeptical. Who better to infiltrate a network targeting teens? Tom got close enough to expose Hartford's real business. Human trafficking disguised as troubled youth interventions. And Miller created a counter network. Every kid he helped disappear became part of an underground railroad. But Tom got in too deep. Hartford must have discovered his connection to Miller. Martinez's radio crackled. "Captain, movement in the sub-basement. Multiple targets heading toward the east exit. Teams in position. Affirmative. Waiting on your order." Sarah showed Martinez one last piece of evidence. A photo from Miller's party. In the background, Tom and John stood apart from the group. Their postures speaking volumes. Tom wasn't just Miller's student or operative, he was his successor. And now he's running Miller's network. The party wasn't graduation. It was a handoff. Miller knew he was marked for death, so he staged a celebration to pass operational control to Tom. Martinez studied the tactical map. "If you're right, we're not just breaching a criminal operation, we're interrupting a rescue. Look at the thermal imaging," Sarah pointed. "Those signatures in the sub-basement, they're moving in formation. That's not Hartford's people, that's Tom's team, executing an extraction. Of whom?" As if in answer, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Margaret was our failsafe. She monitored Hartford for years. Now she's activated. John's last gift to the network. T. Jesus," Martinez breathed. "Miller's widow is a sleeper agent." "No," Sarah corrected, showing her the house blueprints again. "She's mission control. Those escape routes, panic rooms. The Miller house is the nerve center of the entire operation." John didn't just run a mentorship program. He and Margaret built an underground resistance. The radio crackled again. "Captain, we've got headlights. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Hartford, negative, different signatures. These are heavy vehicles. Professional." Sarah's phone lit up one final time. "Time to choose. Detective Johnson, Hartford's cleanup crew is coming." Are you here to stop us or help us? Kids in the basement need extraction now. Margaret has the files. All of them. T. Martinez looked at Sarah. Your call, Johnson. But whatever we do it now. Sarah thought of Buddy, still guarding that grave. Not guarding, waiting. The dog wasn't mourning. He was stationed, marking the first breadcrumb in a trail that led here. She made her decision. Martinez, split your team. Half contain Hartford's incoming crew. Half provide cover for the basement extraction. We're not stopping this rescue. We're protecting it. And after, Sarah checked her weapon. After, we follow Margaret Miller to the files. It's time everyone knew what really happens to missing kids in Maplewood. The radio burst to life with urgent voices. The operation was starting, ready or not. Somewhere in the darkness, Tom Reynolds was about to show them just how deep John Miller's legacy really went. The sub-basement air was thick with tension as Sarah, Martinez, and Chen descended the hidden stairwell. Emergency lights cast red shadows across industrial walls. Their footsteps echoed despite their attempts at stealth. 3 heat signatures behind that door, Chen whispered, checking her thermal scanner. Moving in a defensive pattern, Sarah's radio crackled softly. Hartford's cleanup crew, 6 minutes out. Mike reported from his surveillance position. Heavy weapons. Military training. Martinez signaled her team to take positions. Johnson, your call. We breach on your mark. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway, weapon trained steadily on them. Sarah recognized her from the missing persons files. Jessica Torres disappeared 3 years ago. Detective Johnson, Jessica said calmly. Tom said you'd figure it out. Where are they? Safe room C. We're moving them in stages. Margaret's coordinating the exit routes. Martinez kept her weapon ready. How many? 14 students. Originally Hartford's candidates. We've been tracking them for months. Tonight was extraction night. Sarah lowered her weapon slowly. Show us. Jessica led them through a maze of corridors, clearly designed for quick evacuations. They passed rooms filled with communications, equipment, medical supplies, and go bags ready for rapid deployment. Miller built all this? Chen asked. No, Jessica replied. He inherited it. The network existed before him. He just repurposed it. They reached a heavy blast door marked C. Inside, teenagers sat in small groups, many still wearing their Maplewood High uniforms. 2 more operators, former missing students, stood guard. Hartford was recruiting them for his trafficking operation, Jessica explained. Used the school as hunting ground. Miller identified the targets, then got to them first. Sarah spotted 2 familiar faces, the missing students from the original case. They weren't scared teenagers anymore. They moved with purpose, helping organize the younger ones. Status report, Martinez demanded. One of the operators checked his tablet. First group's already in transit. Second group prepped for movement. Third group, he gestured to the remaining students. Ready on your order. Suddenly, explosions rocked the upper levels. Mike's voice burst through the radio. They're here. Hartford's team breached early. Heavy fire on the north entrance. Martinez grabbed her radio. All units, engage. Protect the south exit route. Too late, Jessica said, checking her own communications. They're covering all exits. Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from Tom. Plan B, lower tunnels. 10 minutes. There's another way out, Sarah asked. Jessica moved to a wall panel, entering a code. River access. Old Prohibition tunnels. Tom's team is coming up through them now. The wall slid open, revealing a dark passage. From above, gunfire and explosions intensified. Martinez, Sarah said. Your team needs to hold them upstairs. Buy us time. The captain hesitated for only a moment. Chen, with me. Johnson, get them out. She tossed Sarah a tactical radio. Frequency 7. Secure channel. As Martinez and Chen headed upstairs, Sarah turned to Jessica. How long to evac everyone? 8 minutes minimum. Tunnel systems tight. Another explosion, closer this time. Dust fell from the ceiling. Sarah made a decision. Start moving them. I'm going to find Margaret. She's handling topside coordination. She has the files, the evidence to bring down Hartford's entire operation. We need those files. Jessica nodded to one of her operators. Marcus, take point on Eva. I'm going with Johnson. They moved quickly through the facility, ascending to the ground level through a maintenance shaft. The sounds of battle echoed through the building. Through gaps in the walls, they could see muzzle flashes and the chaos of close-quarter combat. Sarah's radio crackled. Johnson, Martinez's voice was strained. We've got problems. Hartford's here, personally. He's headed for the records room. Where? East Wing. Second floor. Moving fast. Shit. The sound of gunfire cut through the transmission. Jessica pulled up a blueprint on her phone. Records, rooms, a decoy. Margaret will be in the server hub, sub-level 2. They changed direction, descending again. The hub was a climate-controlled room filled with servers. Margaret stood at a central console, calmly downloading files. 3 minutes to completion, she said, without looking up. Hartford's men are good, but they don't know this building like we do. Sarah moved to cover the door. The students. Second group clearing the tunnels. Now, Tom's teams are leading them to separate safe houses. Margaret removed a hard drive. 20 years of evidence. Every transaction, every kid Hartford's organization targeted. Names of collaborators in law enforcement, school boards, social services. Why now? Margaret's eyes were hard. John's death was the signal. The network needed to appear broken for Hartford to get sloppy. Make him think he'd won. And Tom, deeply embedded, had to maintain his cover even after John died. Hartford never suspected his perfect soldier was working against him. The download completed. Margaret handed Sarah a second drive. Backup, insurance. Suddenly, the lights went out. Emergency systems kicked in as an alarm blared. They've reached the power core, Jessica reported. 5 minutes until total shutdown. Sarah's radio came alive with Martinez's voice. Johnson, we're losing the north section. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. Margaret moved to a hidden panel. Maintenance tunnel. Leads to the river exit. Different route than the students. You planned for everything, Sarah observed. John's plans, Margaret corrected. He spent years preparing for this night. Every contingency, every escape route. As they entered the tunnel, Sarah's phone lit up one final time. Evidence secured. Students clear. Finish it. Behind them, the facility's lights flickered and died, plunging the underground complex into darkness. But ahead, through the tunnel's exit, the first light of dawn was breaking over Maplewood. In the aftermath of the facility raid, Sarah sat in her office, surrounded by decades of evidence. Margaret's hard drives had revealed a story far larger than Maplewood. On her wall, a new collection of photos and documents traced connections across multiple states. It started in 1990. Margaret's recorded statement played from Sarah's laptop. John was a student teacher when he first discovered what was happening. Children disappearing from schools, only to resurface in trafficking networks. He tried reporting it, but the corruption went too deep. Sarah studied a yearbook photo from John's early teaching days. He stood among a group of students, looking impossibly young. One face was circled, a teenage girl named Amanda Brooks. Amanda was his first rescue. Margaret's voice continued. She wasn't just saved, she became the prototype. John realized that survivors, properly trained, made the best protectors. They understood the signs, knew the methods traffickers used. Rachel entered with a stack of decoded files. You need to see this, she said, spreading documents across the desk. Miller didn't create the network. He found it. The documents revealed an underground railroad dating back to the 1970s, originally helping abuse victims escape dangerous homes. John had discovered it through Amanda, who later became his first operative. Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from Tom. Ready to talk. Same cabin, 1 hour. At the cabin, Tom Reynolds waited with Buddy. The dog had finally left John's grave, his vigil complete. Tom looked different now. Older, harder, but with the same intensity Sarah remembered from surveillance photos. Hartford's operation was just one piece. Tom began without preamble. There are networks like his in every state. They use schools as hunting grounds, targeting vulnerable kids. John found a way to fight back by creating your own network, by giving survivors purpose. Every student in the program was carefully chosen. Some needed saving. Others showed potential to become saviors. Sarah pulled out the photo from John's last party. These markings by their names. They weren't about who to extract. No, Tom confirmed. They were assignments. Ready meant ready to join the network as operators. Unstable needed more training. Liability. He paused. Those were the ones Hartford had already compromised. And compromised. Your designation, Tom smiled grimly. Deep cover. John knew Hartford was suspicious of him. Needed someone Hartford would trust completely. A student who'd rejected Miller's help turned against him. Sarah studied the young man before her. How many are there in the network? Hundreds now. All survivors, all trained. We have safe houses in 40 states. Every operator was once a potential victim. And the recent extractions, Hartford's organization was planning something big. Mass trafficking operation disguised as a troubled youth intervention program. State-sponsored, government contracts. They would have had legal authority to remove kids from homes. Sarah's phone lit up with breaking news alerts. Hartford's arrest was making national headlines. His connections to trafficking networks were being exposed across the country. John's death was planned, wasn't it? Sarah asked quietly. Tom nodded. His last mission. Hartford needed to believe the network was vulnerable. John, he paused, emotion finally cracking his professional facade. He chose to be the sacrifice that would bring it all down. And Buddy, our signal. As long as he guarded the grave, it meant maintain cover. When he led you to the cabin, the operation was ready to move. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Rachel had completed the analysis of John's complete records. The message made her breath catch. Found his original files. Miller wasn't just a teacher, former intelligence operative. The mentorship program was based on recruitment protocols. John trained us well, Tom said, noting her reaction. Every lesson, every mentoring session, it was all preparation. He taught us to observe, to plan, to disappear. But most importantly, he taught us to recognize others like us. And now we continue his work. Hartford's organization is exposed, but others will take its place. There are always more predators, and always more kids who need protection. Sarah looked at the files spread before her. Evidence of a decades-long shadow war fought in school hallways and suburban streets. Why tell me all this? Because John trusted you. He kept tabs on your investigation into the Preston County disappearances. Said you were one of the few who couldn't be bought. What do you want from me? Tom exchanged a look with Buddy. We need people on the inside. Legal channels. John left instructions. If you were ready. Sarah thought about the teenagers she'd helped evacuate. About Emily Chen, safe in Seattle. About all the others still at risk. Show me, she said. Tom pulled out a final file, profiles of current students, each marked with familiar annotations. Potential victims, potential saviors, the next generation of John Miller's legacy. Welcome to the network, Detective Johnson. The autumn wind swept across Maplewood Cemetery. As Sarah stood before John Miller's grave, Buddy sat beside her, no longer as a guard but as a companion. 1 month had passed since Hartford's arrest, and the true story was finally emerging. In her hand, Sarah held John's final letter, delivered by Margaret that morning. The pages revealed the complete truth that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Dear Sarah, the letter began. If you're reading this, then Buddy has completed his mission, and you've unveiled the truth I spent my life protecting. But there's one last story you need to know. Sarah read on, learning how John's journey had started 30 years ago. As a young teacher, he'd discovered a student's cry for help hidden in an essay, a detailed account of abuse by a prominent community figure. When official channels failed, John had turned to Amanda Brooks, a former student who'd created an underground support network for survivors. Together, they'd transformed that network into something unprecedented, a covert organization run by survivors, dedicated to protecting vulnerable youth. Each rescued child was given a choice: disappear to a new life or join the network as a protector. Sarah's phone buzzed with updates from across the country. Hartford's arrest had triggered a cascade of investigations. Similar operations were being exposed in 12 states. The evidence Margaret had preserved was destroying trafficking networks that had operated with impunity for generations. Tom appeared beside her, his usual intensity softened by the setting sun. "The coordinated raids are complete," he reported. 47 children rescued in the last 24 hours. Hartford's entire infrastructure is compromised. And the others, the ones who needed to disappear, safe, new identities, new homes. The network holds. Sarah pulled out the final piece of evidence: security footage from the night of John's death. He knew, didn't he, that Hartford would come for him? Tom nodded. It was always the plan. His death needed to be convincing. Hartford had to believe he'd won. The footage showed John in his office that last night, calmly preparing documents, petting Buddy one last time. He'd walked out to meet his fate with the dignity of a man who'd chosen his ending. Margaret was his masterpiece, Tom continued. The grieving widow, hiding her true role as the network's intelligence hub. Every tear, every public appearance, perfect cover for coordinating our operations. Sarah thought about the students she'd helped rescue from the facility. How many are like you? Operators hiding in plain sight. Hundreds. Teachers, counselors, social workers, law enforcement. All survivors, all committed to the cause. John built more than a rescue network. He created a hidden army of protectors. Her phone lit up again. Rachel had completed the final analysis of John's records. The scale was staggering. Over 2 decades, the network had saved thousands of children, disrupted countless trafficking operations, and planted operators throughout the system. "Why did he choose me?" Sarah asked. "Your Preston County investigation. You kept digging, despite the pressure to stop. John said you had the right combination of skills and conscience." Tom paused. "He left instructions for your recruitment years ago." Buddy stood suddenly, ears perked. Moments later, Margaret appeared, carrying a thick folder. "The next generation," she said, handing it to Sarah. 23 students, currently at risk. Hartford's operation identified them as targets before it fell. Sarah opened the folder, reviewing the profiles. Each face represented a child at a crossroads. Potential victim or future protector. What's my role? Official credentials. Legal authority. The network needs legitimate cover to operate, Margaret explained. John built the shadow system. Now we need to connect it to legal channels. And Buddy. As if in answer, the dog moved to Sarah's side, assuming the same alert posture he'd maintained at John's grave. "He's your partner now," Tom said. "John trained him personally. He can identify potential recruits, spot threats, guide you to safe houses." Sarah knelt beside the dog, seeing him with new understanding. Not just a loyal pet, but a trained operative, as much a part of the network as any human agent. Her decision was made. "Where do we start?" "There's a school in Preston County," Margaret said. 3 students showing signs. The local network operative is a guidance counselor named David Chen, Emily's father. Sarah looked at John's grave one last time. The simple headstone revealed nothing of the incredible legacy it marked. He built all this, knowing he wouldn't see the end. "No," Tom corrected. "He built it knowing it would never end. There's always another child to save, another predator to stop. The network is eternal." As they walked away, Sarah felt the weight of her new role settling on her shoulders. The mystery of John Miller had led her to something far larger than one man's death. She'd discovered a hidden war, fought in the shadows by survivors protecting the vulnerable. Buddy walked beside her, alert and ready. Above them, the sun set on Maplewood, a town that would never know the full truth of what happened in its quiet streets. But somewhere in the darkness, John Miller's network was moving, watching, protecting. The loyal dog at a grave had been just the beginning. The real story was in the lives saved, the children protected, the survivors who became guardians. And now, Sarah was part of that legacy, one more link in a chain of protectors that stretched back decades and would continue long into the future. The mystery was solved, but the mission was eternal. And somewhere, Sarah knew, John Miller was smiling.